The moonlight cast pale, ghostly shadows across the forest, its soft glow fighting against the darkness that had settled like a heavy blanket. The trees, twisted and ancient, whispered secrets of forgotten times, their gnarled branches stretching toward the heavens as though begging for release from their own burden. Ilara ran, her breath sharp and shallow, her heart pounding in her chest. The cold air bit at her skin, but it was nothing compared to the pain of the bond she had been cursed with, the cruel mate bond that had trapped her to a man she could never love. She had tried to flee before, but this time was different. The magic in her veins pulsed with a bitter urgency, urging her to run faster, to escape before he found her, before Varric found her. The bond tugged at her, an invisible thread that connected her to him, pulling her back to his grasp. No matter how far she ran, no matter how much she tried to fight it, it was always there, tightening around her heart like a noose. The memories of his cold, calculating eyes and his cruel, possessive touch haunted her every step. Varric was a man who believed that power was everything, a man who saw her not as a woman but as a possession, something to be controlled. The bond that had once seemed like a gift, a connection meant to unite two souls, had become a curse, a prison. She had once tried to love him, or at least tried to believe in the bond, but now she only felt hatred, resentment, and fear. A rustle in the bushes brought her back to the present. Her heart skipped, and she instinctively slowed her pace. She glanced behind her, her breath coming in short gasps. There was no one. The forest seemed empty, save for the creatures of the night. But she could feel him. She could feel Varric's presence even from miles away. His dark power reached into the very air she breathed, choking the life out of her every time she thought of him. His magic was always there, lingering like a shadow. She pushed forward, desperation in every step, until her legs began to ache, until the world around her blurred. The forest grew denser, the trees thicker, but she couldn't stop. She had to keep running. She had to escape. The path before her forked, and she chose the one that led deeper into the woods, away from the main road. It was a long shot. She didn't know where it led, but she didn't have time to think. She needed shelter. She needed safety. Her footfalls quickened as she entered a small clearing, her eyes scanning the dark shadows for any sign of movement. It was then that she saw it. A building, small and tucked away, half hidden in the trees. Its windows glowed warmly, a stark contrast to the cold, endless night around her. A tavern. Her heart thudded, and for the first time in what felt like days, she allowed herself to breathe. She was safe for now, she hoped. As she approached the tavern, her hand trembling, she hesitated for a moment. She had no way of knowing who lived here, but at this point she had little choice. Her body ached with exhaustion and her mind screamed for rest. She couldn't keep running forever. She pushed open the door, and the warm air hit her like a wave. The low murmur of voices and the scent of something rich and earthy filled her senses. The tavern was dimly lit, with wooden beams overhead and a fire crackling in the hearth. It was a cozy, welcoming space, unlike anything she had expected. But what drew her attention the most was the man behind the bar. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell over his forehead in messy waves. His eyes, though, were what caught her attention. Deep golden eyes that seemed to glow with an unnatural intensity. His gaze met hers the moment she stepped inside, and Ilara felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something about him, something ancient and powerful, that made her feel both afraid and strangely drawn to him. He said nothing, just continued to wipe down a glass, his eyes never leaving her. The quiet attention made her uneasy, but at the same time it was comforting. In a world filled with deceit and pain, it was a rarity to encounter someone who simply noticed. She took a hesitant step toward the bar, her boots making soft thuds on the wooden floor. Her voice caught in her throat as she finally spoke. "Do you have a room for the night?" His gaze flickered briefly to her, studying her with an intensity that felt almost predatory. But there was no malice in his look, just curiosity, as if he were trying to figure out exactly who she was and why she had come here. "We have a room," he said, his voice smooth and low, like velvet. It held an authority that made her pause. "But only if you're not running from something." Ilara's breath hitched, and she fought to keep her face neutral. She could feel the weight of his words, as if he knew somehow that she was fleeing. But how could he possibly know? I'm not running from anything," she lied, forcing a small smile. "Just a long journey. Needed a place to rest." He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he studied her with those piercing eyes, as though he could see through her words, through the layers of fear and exhaustion that clouded her mind. For a moment, Alara thought she might crumble under his gaze. But then just as quickly, he turned away and reached for a key on the shelf behind him. "Room 4, he said, sliding the key across the bar toward her. "Up the stairs." Alara took the key, feeling his gaze linger on her as she moved toward the stairs. She didn't know why, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the man behind the bar was not what he seemed. There was something about him that felt dangerous. And yet there was something else, something softer, something deeper that called to her, urging her to stay, to trust him. But trust was something Alara had long since lost. She had given her trust to Varric, and look where that had gotten her. She paused at the bottom of the stairs, glancing back at the man, who had already turned his attention back to the bar. The soft murmur of voices in the tavern swirled around her, but for a moment she could only hear the steady beat of her own heart. She had entered the tavern hoping for rest, for refuge. But now she couldn't shake the feeling that something far more complicated lay ahead. Cliffhanger. She stepped up the stairs, unaware that the man behind the bar, Lucian, was watching her every movement. His golden eyes glinted in the firelight, and a small, almost imperceptible smile tugged at the corner of his lips. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the tavern. Alara sat at one of the small wooden tables near the window, her eyes trained on the street outside, though she saw nothing but the endless dark of the forest. She had not expected to find such a place in the middle of nowhere. A tavern, warm and inviting, tucked away from the rest of the world. Her thoughts, however, refused to settle. The moment she had stepped inside and met Lucian, the tavern owner, something had shifted within her. It wasn't just his intense golden eyes or the quiet strength he exuded. It was the way he watched her, as if he could see all of her, as if her secrets were written across her skin for him alone to read. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, glancing around the dimly lit room. A few travelers lingered in the corners, their voices hushed as if they too understood the unspoken rule of silence here. The tavern felt like a world unto itself, cut off from time. Alara didn't know if she was grateful for the isolation, or if it made her feel more trapped. The sound of footsteps drew her attention. Lucian approached her table, a small, knowing smile on his lips. "Your room is ready if you'd like to rest," he said, his voice calm, almost too calm. Alara nodded, standing to follow him, though her mind remained scattered, a whirlwind of thoughts she couldn't contain. Why had she fled? And why had she felt an undeniable connection to Lucian, when all she wanted was to escape from anyone with power? Lucian's gaze lingered on her for a heartbeat too long, but he said nothing. Instead, he led her up the stairs to the second floor, where the rooms were small but comfortable. A single candle flickered in the corner of the dimly lit hallway. "Room 4, he said, pushing the door open with a smooth, practiced motion. The room was simple but clean, a small bed with a soft quilt, a desk by the window, and a crackling fireplace. The air smelled faintly of wood and earth, a scent that felt like home in this strange place. It was the kind of room where one could lose themselves in sleep, forget the world outside. But Alara's mind wouldn't let her rest. "Thank you," she said quietly, unsure if she was thanking him for the room or for something else, something unspoken that hung between them. Lucian nodded once, but didn't leave. Instead, he leaned against the doorframe, his golden eyes fixed on her as if waiting for something. Waiting for her to speak. To tell him the story she hadn't told anyone. She felt a sudden pressure in her chest. She wasn't ready to share her pain. Not with him, not with anyone. Not even after the strange pull she felt when they had first locked eyes. She turned away, pacing to the window and looking out into the black forest. The trees were silhouettes in the night, and the wind rustled through them, sending waves of shadows across the ground. Her gaze drifted to the moon, shining pale and distant above the treetops. Its light reminded her of the bond she had tried so desperately to flee. Every night it pulled her back toward Varric, toward the man who had claimed her heart, only to twist it into something dark and suffocating. Lucian's voice broke through the silence. "You're running from someone, aren't you?" His tone was quiet, but there was a sharpness beneath it, as if he already knew the answer. Alara stiffened. She didn't want to acknowledge it, but the truth was there, hanging in the air between them. Varric, her cruel mate bond. She could feel it even now, a faint tug at the edge of her soul. "I don't want to talk about it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Her heart clenched with the words, but she refused to let him see how much they hurt. Lucian didn't press further. Instead, he simply nodded and stepped back, allowing her space. "Perhaps one day you will," he said softly, his words laced with a quiet understanding. "But for now, rest. You've been running for a long time. The world can wait for a while." Elara couldn't help but look at him, then truly look at him. There was something in his eyes, something old, something wise. He seemed to know more than he let on, and yet for all his mystery there was no judgment in his gaze. Just a calmness that made her feel safe. But safe from what? Safe from whom? Lucian was a man of power. That much was obvious. She didn't need to ask to know. There was an air of authority about him, a quiet strength that spoke of a past filled with difficult choices and burdens carried in silence. Still, it didn't make sense. How could someone like him be here, in a small tavern away from the politics and the cruelty of the world? The way he looked at her, it was almost as if he could see past her fear, past the walls she had built to protect herself from the world. Her chest tightened at the thought. She couldn't allow herself to trust him, not yet. She was already too vulnerable, too raw from the weight of her escape. "I'll be fine," she said firmly. Though the words didn't quite reach her heart, Lucian's gaze softened. But there was still a hint of something unreadable behind his eyes. He turned toward the door, but just before leaving, he paused and looked over his shoulder. "Don't stay here because you're running from something," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Stay because you want to." Elara's breath caught in her throat. His words felt like a challenge, like a riddle that she couldn't quite solve. She didn't know what he wanted from her, or if he even wanted anything at all, but there was something about his presence that made her feel as though she were on the edge of a precipice, something dangerous, yet enticing, pulling her forward, making her want to take the risk. Lucian left the room, closing the door softly behind him. Elara stood there for a long moment, her mind swirling with confusion. She didn't know what it was about him that made her feel both uneasy and drawn to him. He was a stranger, yet he had made her feel more seen than anyone ever had. She sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers tracing the edge of the quilt. The pull of the mate bond was still there, faint but constant like a shadow at the edge of her consciousness. And yet here in this room, in this strange, quiet tavern, she almost felt free. But she knew better than to believe in freedom. Not when the bond still tied her to a life she didn't want, to a king who would never let her go. And as she lay down to sleep, she couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness outside wasn't the only danger lurking in this place. Lucian's presence, calm and enigmatic, was just as much a threat as the man who had cursed her. Cliffhanger. Just as she closed her eyes, the faintest sound reached her ears, a knock at the door. It was soft, almost hesitant, but unmistakable. She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. Lucian was on the other side, but why was he back? Elara lay in the bed, the blankets tangled around her legs as the flickering candlelight cast faint shadows on the walls. The knock at the door still echoed in her mind. She hadn't expected anyone to come to her room, not so late in the night. Her heart still raced even though she knew it had to be Lucian. She hadn't been able to sleep for hours despite the quiet, despite the warmth of the room. Her thoughts kept returning to him. Lucian, the enigmatic tavern owner, the man with the golden eyes who had shown her a kindness she wasn't sure she deserved. He had offered her shelter, and yet, his presence felt like more than just that. It felt like a promise she wasn't ready to face. The bond, the mate bond that had haunted her for so long, tugged at her heart again. It was always there, lurking in the corners of her mind. Every step she took away from Varric, every moment of peace she found in this strange tavern seemed to pull her back toward him. She had tried to escape, but could she ever truly outrun him? The knock at the door came again, louder this time. Elara hesitated. She wasn't sure if she wanted to see Lucian. She wasn't sure if she could bear his presence. But then, as if something inside her made the decision for her, she swung her legs over the edge of the bed and stood. The cold floor beneath her feet felt grounding, a reminder of the harsh reality waiting outside this room. She crossed the room slowly, her pulse quickening with every step. She didn't know what to expect. What did he want? Was he here to ask more questions, to press her for answers she didn't have? When she opened the door, Lucian was standing in the hallway, his figure dark against the dim light of the candle in his hand. His golden eyes were calm, but there was an unmistakable intensity in them that made her breath catch in her throat. "You didn't answer," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. Alara stepped back slightly, instinctively creating some space between them. "I didn't know who it was," she replied, her voice quieter than she intended. "I thought I was being followed." Lucian's gaze softened, but only slightly. He didn't step into the room immediately. He seemed to respect her space, though the air between them still felt thick, charged with a quiet tension neither of them acknowledged. "I'm sorry," he said after a moment, his voice steady, "but I needed to speak with you." "About what?" Alara asked, her throat dry. She knew what was coming. She could feel it in her bones. There was something more to Lucian than he was letting on. Lucian met her eyes, his gaze never wavering. "I know you're running from something," he said simply. "And I know it's not just the wind in your hair or the night at your back. You're running from a man, a king. Varric, isn't it?" Alara stiffened, her heart leaping into her throat. "How did he know?" "I don't," she began, but her voice faltered. Lucian's eyes darkened, his jaw tightening. He was quiet for a moment, as though considering his next words carefully. Finally, he stepped forward just a little, but enough to close the distance between them. "You don't have to tell me everything, Alara," he said, his voice softer now. "But you can't keep running forever. You know that, don't you?" She swallowed hard. He was right. She couldn't keep running. She had thought she could escape, thought she could outrun the bond, outrun the curse. But it always caught up to her, no matter how fast or how far she ran. "What do you want from me?" Alara's voice trembled despite her best efforts to sound strong. Lucian's gaze never wavered. "I want you to understand something," he said slowly. "You're not alone in this. Not anymore." Alara's breath caught in her chest. "I don't need anyone's help. I just need to be left alone." Lucian's face softened, but there was a flicker of something darker in his eyes. "The problem with running from your past, Alara, is that it always finds you. And Varric? He'll find you too, no matter where you go." Her heart skipped. The thought of Varric, of his cold touch, of his unyielding grip on her soul made her shiver. The bond she shared with him was something that could never be severed easily. But could Lucian be telling the truth? Could he help her? "You think you can stop him?" she asked, her voice shaky. Lucian paused, considering her question carefully. "I know I can." He stepped closer, the distance between them shrinking until she could feel the warmth of his body near hers. "But it won't be without consequences." Alara's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" Lucian's golden eyes gleamed, his voice dropping to a hushed whisper. "I am an Alpha King, Alara, a ruler of beasts and shadows. My power is not just a title. It's a force that could protect you from Varric. But it's not something you can run from once you accept it. Once you accept me." Alara felt the weight of his words. The room seemed to close in around her. She hadn't known what to expect from Lucian, but this was more than she had bargained for. "You want to claim me," she whispered, feeling a flicker of something deep within her. A mixture of fear and longing. Lucian's eyes darkened. "Yes, but not in the way you think." She took a step back, her heart thundering in her chest. "You're not making any sense." "I'm not asking you to understand everything right now," Lucian said, his voice low and compelling. "But what I'm asking is this. Will you allow me to protect you, to fight for you, even if it means stepping into a world of power and sacrifice you can't yet see?" Alara's mind raced. She had never trusted anyone with her heart. Her bond with Varric had taught her that trust was a dangerous thing. And yet, in Lucian's eyes there was something different, a promise, a possibility that she couldn't ignore. The world outside the tavern was full of darkness, full of dangers. And yet, standing here with Lucian, she felt something more. She felt seen. For the first time in so long, she felt like she wasn't just a shadow of someone else's making. But could she trust him? Could she truly trust herself to step into this world of power, of beasts and kings knowing the consequences? Lucian didn't wait for an answer. He was patient, his gaze steady as he watched her. He wasn't pushing her. He was offering her a choice, one she wasn't sure she was ready to make. Cliffhanger. "I won't force you, Alara," Lucian said quietly, his words like a spell wrapping around her. "But I won't let you face Varric alone either. Not when I can stop him." His voice softened, his gaze tender for the first time. "The question is, do you want me to?" The moon hung low in the sky, casting an ethereal glow over the world outside the tavern. Ilara stood at the window gazing out at the silvered forest, her thoughts a tangled web of fear, hope, and confusion. The wind had picked up, rustling the leaves and carrying the distant sounds of the forest with it, but the air felt heavy, as though something was about to change, something that she could neither understand nor escape. Lucien's words from earlier echoed in her mind. "I'm an Alpha King. Ilara, I can stop Varric, but it won't be without consequences." She had felt the weight of his promise, the sincerity in his voice. But could she really trust him? Could she trust herself? She didn't know. She had spent so long running from Varric, from the curse that bound her to him, from the life that had been ripped away before she even had a chance to live it. And yet, here she was, standing in a room in a strange tavern with a man she hardly knew offering her a way out. But at what cost? A soft knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. She froze, her pulse quickening. For a moment, she didn't move. But then, as if she were under some strange spell, she found herself crossing the room, her hand trembling as she reached for the door. When she opened it, Lucien stood there, as calm and commanding as ever. His golden eyes seemed to glow in the dim light of the hallway, the shadows playing across his features in a way that made him appear both distant and near all at once. His presence filled the doorway, overwhelming and undeniable. "You're still awake," he observed, his voice soft but firm. He stepped inside without waiting for permission, his broad frame filling the space. Ilara stepped back, her heart racing. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted, unsure why she was telling him this. "Too much on my mind." Lucien's gaze softened as he looked at her. "I understand," he said, his voice rich with empathy. "But tonight we must talk. The moon is at its peak, and with it the bond between us grows stronger." Ilara's heart skipped a beat. The bond. She could feel it now. Deeper than before, like an invisible thread pulling at her chest. It was the mate bond, the curse she had tried to escape. She had thought she could outrun it, but it seemed that wherever she went, it followed. She turned away from him, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want from me, Lucien?" she asked, the question heavy in the air. "Why are you so determined to help me?" Lucien took a slow, deliberate step toward her. He was close now, and Ilara could feel the heat of his body radiating toward her. She fought the instinct to back away, to create distance between them, but there was something about him that made it hard to resist. "I'm not just offering you help, Ilara," Lucien said, his voice low and compelling. "I'm offering you a choice. You have the power to break the curse, to sever the bond that ties you to Varric. But it requires more than just your will, it requires your trust. And tonight the moon will show us if you're ready to make that choice." Her breath caught in her throat. "I don't know if I can trust you," she confessed, her voice shaking. "I don't know if I can trust anyone anymore." Lucien's eyes softened, a glimmer of understanding flashing across his face. "I know what it's like to feel alone, Ilara, to carry a burden that no one else can see. But you don't have to carry it alone anymore. I'm offering you a way out, but you must trust me." She wanted to pull away, to close herself off, but his words, his calm, unwavering presence made her hesitate. She had always kept her distance from people, afraid of what they might do, afraid of what they might want from her. But Lucien wasn't like the others. She could feel it in the way he spoke to her, in the way he watched her with such intensity, as though she were more than just a woman. She was something worth protecting. "The bond," she whispered. "What if I can't break it? What if it's too strong?" Lucien reached out, his hand hovering near hers. His touch was not forceful but gentle, as if he were waiting for her permission. When she didn't pull away, he closed the distance between them, his fingers brushing against hers. The touch sent a shiver down her spine, and for a moment everything else faded away. "The bond is strong, yes," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But it's not unbreakable. You have the power, Ilara. You just need to believe in it. Believe in yourself." She felt the weight of his words. Could she? Could she truly believe in herself enough to break free from the chains of the mate bond? Could she let go of the life she had known, the life that had been torn away from her, and step into something new? Lucien's gaze never wavered, his golden eyes filled with something deep, something she couldn't quite name. "Tonight the moon will be at its peak," he continued. "The magic is strongest at this time. If you choose to break the bond, you must act now. But be warned, Ilara, the choice will change everything. It won't be easy, and it will come with consequences. If you break the bond with Varric, you can never go back. There is no undoing this. The past will be lost to you and your future will be forever changed. Ilara's heart pounded in her chest. The weight of his words settled over her like a cloak, heavy and suffocating. Was she ready for this? Was she ready to lose everything for a chance at freedom? She began, but her words faltered. She didn't know what to say, what to do. The decision felt like an impossible one, the stakes higher than anything she had ever known. But at the same time, she could feel it, the pull, the deep desire to break free, to escape the past that had haunted her for so long. Lucian stepped closer, his presence overwhelming, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Ilara allowed herself to lean into him. She let her guard down, if only for a moment, and she felt the heat of his body against hers. "You don't have to decide now," Lucian said softly, his lips brushing against her ear. "But when the moon reaches its peak, the choice will be yours." A sudden wave of emotion crashed over her. She didn't know what to do, but for the first time, she didn't feel alone. Lucian's presence, his unwavering confidence, made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she could find a way out. The bond with Varric had held her captive for so long. But tonight, with Lucian by her side, she felt the first stirrings of hope. Cliffhanger. The sound of the wind howling through the trees grew louder, and the room seemed to darken as the moon rose higher in the sky. Ilara turned to face Lucian, her heart beating faster with each passing second, and then, just as she was about to speak, she heard a distant sound, a horse's hooves, thundering through the forest. The past had come for her. The moon hung high in the sky, its silver light cutting through the window like a blade. Ilara stood in the center of her room, her heart racing, her thoughts a whirlwind. The distant sound of hooves had not stopped. Each step of the approaching horse seemed to echo louder in her chest, like a drumbeat that grew faster with each passing second. Varric. He was coming for her. She could feel it deep in her bones, a pull she couldn't deny, a connection that had never truly faded, even in the farthest reaches of her escape. She turned toward the window, her eyes searching the darkness outside, but she saw nothing. The night seemed to swallow the world whole, and yet the sound of the horse's hooves only grew louder. The bond with Varric had always been there, lingering in the background of her life like a shadow she couldn't outrun. Lucian. Her thoughts snapped back to the man who had offered her freedom, the man who had stood beside her in her darkest moments. He had given her a choice, a way to break free from the chains of her past, but now, as Varric's presence loomed closer, she wondered if she had made the right choice. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Ilara hesitated. It was late, far too late for anyone else to be visiting her. And yet, she knew it had to be Lucian. She walked slowly to the door, her breath caught in her throat. The weight of her decision felt heavier than ever. When she opened the door, Lucian stood in the hallway as calm and composed as always, but his eyes betrayed something more. They were filled with an intensity that matched her own. His golden eyes seemed to burn with something deeper than desire, something that bordered on desperation. "It's time, Ilara," he said softly, his voice low and steady. "The moon is at its peak. If you're going to make your choice, it has to be now." She swallowed hard, the words caught in her throat. She didn't know how to answer him. The weight of everything, her past, her bond with Varric, her future with Lucian, was pressing down on her, making it hard to breathe. "I don't know if I can," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I can let go of everything. It's all I've ever known." Lucian stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. He didn't touch her, but his nearness made her heart race even faster. "I know it's hard, but you have to decide, Ilara. You can't keep running from the past, not forever, and you can't keep carrying this burden alone. You have the power to break the bond, but it's up to you whether you want to." His words sank into her like stones. She had always felt trapped, like she was running in circles, unable to break free from the curse that had bound her to Varric. She had tried to outrun it, tried to escape, but it was always there, waiting to drag her back. But now, standing before Lucian, she realized that she had a choice. She could choose freedom. She could choose a life without fear, without the suffocating weight of a bond that had never been her choice. She could choose a future with Lucian, someone who saw her, who understood her in a way no one else had. But with that choice came uncertainty. She didn't know what the future would hold, or if she would ever be truly free of the past that had haunted her for so long. I'm scared, Alara admitted, her voice barely a whisper. What if I make the wrong choice? What if breaking the bond destroys everything? Lucian's gaze softened, his voice gentle as he spoke. You can't live in fear forever, Alara. The past is behind you now. You have the strength to make this choice, to step into the future with your own power, and I will stand by you no matter what you choose. The sound of hooves outside grew louder and Alara's heart skipped. It was too late. Varric was here. He had found her, just as she had always known he would. Lucian's eyes never left her as he spoke again. We don't have much time. Varric is coming. If you want to break the bond, it has to be now. But I need to know, do you trust me? Do you trust yourself enough to make this choice? Alara took a step back, her hand instinctively reaching for the doorframe. Her mind was a blur of conflicting emotions, fear, longing, uncertainty. But in the depths of her heart something shifted. The bond with Varric had never been hers to begin with. It had been forced upon her like a prison, a cage she had never wanted. She turned to face Lucian, her eyes searching his, looking for any hint of doubt. But there was none. His expression was firm, resolute, as though he knew she was capable of far more than she had ever given herself credit for. I want to be free, she whispered, her voice trembling but steady. I want to be free from him. And from the bond. Lucian's gaze softened, a look of quiet pride in his eyes. He stepped closer, his hand reaching for hers. Then let me help you. Together we can break it. Together we can forge a new path. Alara nodded, her fingers brushing against his, feeling the warmth of his touch spread through her like a flame. She had made her choice. She was no longer running. With a deep breath, she closed her eyes, letting the power of the moon wash over her. The bond with Varric pulsed in her chest like a heavy weight pulling at her heart, but she focused on Lucian's presence beside her, the warmth of his hand in hers, the strength in his gaze. She focused on the life she had always dreamed of, the freedom she had longed for, and the future she wanted to build. In that moment, the magic within her surged to life, a quiet but powerful force, and she could feel the bond with Varric weakening. The pull of it lessened, fading away like a receding tide until it was nothing more than a faint whisper at the edges of her mind. And then, it was gone. The silence that followed was deafening. The bond that had held her captive for so long was broken. She opened her eyes, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt truly free. Lucian's hand tightened around hers, and he smiled, a small, relieved smile that spoke volumes. It's done, he whispered. You're free. Alara felt the weight lift from her shoulders, the burden of the bond vanishing like smoke in the wind. But as she looked up at Lucian, she realized that the true choice had just begun. The past was behind her, but the future, her future, was still waiting to be written. And with Lucian by her side, she knew she wasn't alone anymore. Cliffhanger. But as she turned to face the door, the sound of hooves grew louder again and Alara's heart skipped. The future she had just chosen was already being tested, and she didn't know what awaited her beyond the door.